Picture this Modesto, California, Christmas Eve. It's 2002. The air is crisp, houses are all decked out for the holidays. There's this feeling of, anticipation in the air. But for the Peterson family, this Christmas, it was going to become a nightmare. Laci Peterson, 27 years old, 8 months pregnant, excited for the arrival of her son Connor, vanishes, just gone without a trace. And what started as a missing persons case quickly just spiraled, became this huge media frenzy, full of shocking revelations, and ultimately ending in a trial that just captivated the nation. Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series.
Cases like this, involving a pregnant woman and especially around the holidays, they just grab the public's attention in a way that other cases don't. I think there's a sense of vulnerability there, kind of a violation of innocence that's just really unsettling to people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the initial search for Laci was massive. You had family, friends, volunteers. I mean, everyone was desperately trying to find her. Everyone was clinging to hope. But as the days turned into weeks and the investigation intensified, the focus started to shift towards Laci's husband, Scott Peterson.
It's interesting how often, statistically, when a spouse disappears, the partner often becomes a person of interest. But in this case with Scott Peterson, it seemed like the public's perception of him shifted very quickly.
It really did.
Do you think that was fueled by genuine red flags, or was the media already starting to kind of frame a narrative?
It's a great question, and I think it's something that we see play out in a lot of these high-profile cases. So on the surface, you had Scott's alibi. He claimed to have been on this solo fishing trip the day that Laci vanished. But then you had these details. That just didn't seem to add up. You had the dog that was found wandering with its leash still attached. There was Scott's demeanor, which some people perceived as being detached or evasive. And it all kind of contributed to this growing sense of suspicion around him.
And remember, this was like the early 2000s, the very beginning of the 24-hour news cycle. And really the rise of all of these online forums and art tour. The Laci Peterson case, it became one of the first true crime sensations of the internet age. You had people from all over the world weighing in, speculating, forming their own judgments.
No, absolutely. Yeah. The case was everywhere. And just when you thought it couldn't get more complicated, the bombshell dropped. Scott Peterson was having an affair.
Yeah, the revelation of the affair with Amber Frey, that was a pivotal moment in the case. Suddenly you have this seemingly all-American husband being exposed as someone who's capable of deception and betrayal. And of course, the media latched onto this detail, amplifying the drama even further and really shaping public opinion.
It was a media frenzy for sure. And I remember at the time just feeling so much empathy for Amber Frey. Here she was unknowingly involved with a man who's not only married, but also at the center of this huge missing persons investigation. She must have felt completely blindsided.
Right, and her decision to cooperate with the police, to record those phone calls with Scott, that was incredibly brave. It gave us a glimpse into his behavior, his attempts to kind of maintain this facade while his wife was still missing. And while it wasn't direct evidence of murder, it definitely added to the suspicion surrounding him.
It painted a very specific picture of Scott in the public eye, this image of a manipulative, unfaithful husband, potentially capable of something much worse. But even with all of this mounting suspicion, there was still no sign of Laci.
And then months later, the devastating discovery. Laci and Connor's remains were found in the San Francisco Bay, not far from where Scott had claimed to be fishing. It was a heartbreaking end to the search and really confirmed the worst fears of Laci's family and friends.
It must have been just utterly devastating for them to hold on to that hope for so long, only to have it crushed in such a tragic way. And from an investigative standpoint, this discovery shifted the case from a missing persons case to a confirmed homicide investigation.
Right. And that's where the forensic science becomes really crucial, despite the challenges posed by the decomposition of the bodies. Investigators were able to gather evidence, analyze the crime scene, and try to piece together exactly what had happened to Laci and Connor.
It is fascinating to think about the role of forensic evidence in these cases. It's like this silent witness, providing clues and potentially revealing the truth, even when the human accounts are unreliable or conflicting. And in the Laci Peterson case, this evidence would end up playing a key role in the trial that was to come.
Yeah, when they found the bodies, that really changed things for the public. Before, it was all just speculation, suspicion. But now you have victims, and people were really demanding answers. They wanted justice for Laci and Connor.
Absolutely. And with the trial approaching, the media attention was just insane. Every single detail, from Scott's demeanor to, the lawyer he chose to represent him, everything was just completely scrutinized and analyzed.
And this is really where you see the complexities of circumstantial evidence. The prosecution, They didn't have a smoking gun in this case. They didn't have an eyewitness to the murder. They didn't have a confession from Scott. They had to build their case based on all of these little details, all these interconnected pieces of information, each one pointing to Scott's guilt.
Right. So for those of us who aren't lawyers, can you break down exactly what circumstantial evidence is and how it's used in a case like this?
Yeah, so basically circumstantial evidence is indirect evidence. It doesn't directly prove a fact, but it suggests it. Think of it like puzzle pieces. One piece on its own, it might not tell you that much. But when you put enough of those pieces together, a picture starts to emerge.
Okay, that makes sense. So in Scott's case, what were some of those key pieces of circumstantial evidence?
Well, his behavior after Laci disappeared was definitely suspicious. He didn't really seem that concerned. His alibi had inconsistencies. He tried to sell Laci's car. He even inquired about selling their house. All those things raised a lot of red flags for investigators. And then you have the affair with Amber Frey, which again, while it wasn't direct evidence of murder, it definitely said something about his character and his potential motives.
And don't forget those phone calls that Amber recorded. The prosecution used those to portray Scott as this deceptive and manipulative person, someone who was capable of leading a double life.
Exactly. They argued that he wanted to escape fatherhood and start a new life with Amber, free from his marriage.
But the defense maintained that all of this was just circumstantial. They said there was no murder weapon, there wasn't any DNA evidence linking Scott to the crime scene. They basically said that the prosecution's case was built on speculation and innuendo, not hard proof.
Yeah, their strategy was to try to create that reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. Was it possible that someone else abducted Laci? Could the evidence have been planted or misinterpreted? They tried to poke holes in that prosecution's narrative, but it was a really tough battle for them.
For sure, the trial itself, it was a complete media circus. It seemed like everyone in the country was watching it. And in the end, despite the lack of that direct evidence, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty on all counts.
It was a landmark case in a lot of ways. It showed how powerful circumstantial evidence can be when it's presented effectively. And it also kind of showed how that court of public opinion, fueled by the constant media coverage, can have an influence on a jury's perception, even subconsciously.
It really makes you think about, that balance between seeking justice
Yeah.
and ensuring a fair trial. I mean, with all that media attention, was it even possible for Scott to get an impartial verdict?
It's a debate that people are still having today, the Laci Peterson case. It's a fascinating look at our criminal justice system, media ethics, and just those often blurred lines between guilt, innocence,
and public perception. And it raises so many questions, questions about good and evil, the fragility of trust, and those devastating consequences that come with these kinds of violent acts. But it also reminds us about how important it is to seek the truth, to demand accountability, and to never forget the victims. It's hard to believe it's been over 2 decades since this case had everyone glued to their TVs. And yet here we are still talking about it. The Laci Peterson case, it continues to fascinate people. It kind of haunts us too.
It's a story that sticks with you. The young, expectant mother, the seemingly perfect life, just shattered, a husband's lies unraveling, and then ultimately the loss of 2 innocent lives. It's a case that touches on so many primal fears.
Yeah, it's true. And even with the trial and the verdict, there's still so many unanswered questions. Like, what was going through Scott's mind? Did he actually plan this? Or did it happen in a moment of passion? Was there anything anyone could have done to prevent this whole tragedy?
We may never know the full truth. But I think what we can do is try to learn from this case, examine the impact it had, and reflect on the questions it raises about the justice system, about the media, and even about ourselves.
I think one aspect of the case that sometimes gets forgotten is the impact this had on Modesto. This wasn't just a national news story. This was a real-life tragedy that unfolded right there in their community.
Right, and that sense of fear, vulnerability, that must have permeated that community, especially for other pregnant women at the time. I can't imagine. The Laci Peterson case, it's a stark reminder that even in these seemingly idyllic places, darkness can be lurking just beneath the surface.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a reminder that these crimes don't just impact the immediate victims and their families. They have these ripple effects that touch the entire community.
And of course, there's the legacy of Laci and Connor's Law, the Unborn Victims of Violence Act. And while its effectiveness and implications are still being debated today, there's no doubt that it brought the issue of fetal rights into the spotlight on a national stage.
It was definitely landmark legislation, fueled by the Peterson family's determination to make sure that something good came out of their unimaginable loss.
And that really speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the face of such profound grief and injustice, there's still this capacity for hope, for finding purpose and meaning and advocacy.
It's inspiring to see how Laci's family channeled their pain into action. They became tireless advocates for victims' rights.
Their story shows us that, even when things are at their darkest, we still have the power to choose how we respond to tragedy. We can let it consume us, or we can use it to create positive change.
Well said. As we wrap up our deep dive into the Laci Peterson case, I think it's important to remember the victims. Laci, a young woman, so full of life, excited for motherhood, and Connor, the son she never got to meet. Their story should never be forgotten.
You're absolutely right. And while the legal case might be closed, the human story continues, the Laci Peterson case. It serves as a stark reminder of how fragile life can be, the importance of cherishing our loved ones, and that enduring power of hope and resilience.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of the most compelling and tragic true crime cases of our time. We hope this deep dive has given you some new insights, maybe sparked some thoughtful reflection, and perhaps even inspired a renewed sense of empathy and compassion.
If you'd like to learn more about the Laci Peterson case, or find resources for supporting victims of domestic violence, please visit our website. We have links and more information there.
And of course, don't forget to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle and our YouTube channel for more deep dives into these compelling true crime cases. We'll keep unraveling the mysteries, exploring what makes people tick, and shining a light into some of the darkest corners of our world.
Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and as always, stay vigilant.